Hey Josh, how's it going?
I'm doing pretty well, Elliot. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Another wonderful day. Today, the exciting topic that I'm sure everybody is ready to hear about is something that Alan and I talked about in our 201 speech was around the topic of asset allocation and asset location. So, are those scary terms?
Yeah, they're not terms that I have been super familiar with until recently, and I would say that I'm not even fully aware of if you were to quiz me on whether or not I would get them right. There's a 50-50 chance, I guess, that I would get them right, and I'm anxious to hear more because I think as we continue to like solidify these ideas in our minds, or I do in mine, that it will kind of help guide some of the thoughts around where my money is and why it is where it is. And as we've talked about in the past, with the benefit of hindsight, I would say that I'm not as flexible as I wish that I was. So maybe somebody that could be listening to this conversation could maybe make different choices to become slightly more flexible depending on what their goals are.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think that's the reason that we do the case studies more than anything else, right? Is to hopefully get insight into some of these things and be able to empower people to make more optimized choices that maybe than what we made. I know that's certainly why, or one of the reasons why Don and I gave ours is certainly to help other people in the room learn and make better decisions. And of course, us to get our own questions answered. So, groupthink is a really powerful thing.
That's right.
So I think you've hit the nail on the head is that just financial terms in general are intentionally, what's the right word?
Vague.
They are intentionally unclear. Is just they are not the most straightforward, and I think part of that is historically so that people felt like, oh, well, I have to have a guy or gal, but a person to ultimately go handle my finances. And so for me, because I'm not smart enough to literally go do it myself. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I still think there's benefit to getting a second opinion. And I have said this probably many times up to this point now that I do think that I will get to a point that I will hire a fee only fiduciary planner, somebody that can just pay by the hour or by the whatever the specific thing is that they're looking to give me feedback on. But as far as having assets under management where you take all your money and you're handing it over to a person, I don't think that that is the wisest of choices to make. And I will say that with a little bit of education and as we're doing now, just talking to each other as well as just listening to podcasts, reading books, all those things, a lot of these things are they can be learned, and some of them, like this topic, I've made it this far without really having a full understanding of what the two terms really are defined as, and I've been okay. So, but yeah, I think that there is, like you said, it's intentional that a lot of this information is somewhat vague.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would agree that yeah, the AUM model is not one that I endorse really by any stretch of the words, but yeah, a fee only, advice only, fiduciary, yeah, certainly has a place, I think, for a lot of people. And everybody getting that sleep well at night check, tests, whatever you want to call it, I think that's completely worthwhile and a good use of funds. But let's move into the terms a little bit. So asset, well, maybe you start thinking about asset types first. And I don't even have all the definitions in front of me, so I'm just going to be spitting off the cuff from what I know to be true. So don't come murder me in the comments if I misstate anything. So yeah, I mean, as far as an asset, it's something that we're investing in. It may go up in value, it may go down in value, but that's why we're investing, is that we hope that it appreciates as opposed to depreciates. And by and large, the assets that mainly we talk about in this space are, we have stocks or equities, as they're also known. We have bonds, we have cash or cash equivalents, so things like treasury bills or just treasuries in totality, because treasuries come in different durations or length of time, and so that's what makes something a treasury bill or a treasury note. Much deeper topic than I intend to go into here. Um, Things like real estate, obviously, you're a holder of real estate, and how that plays into your portfolio allocation and other alternatives. So I know like Frank Vasquez talks about holding like gold in some of his portfolios. And so there's different investments that you can make for precious metals. There's things like options or futures, which are different types of derivative instruments to basically leverage your different positions that you have. You have things like crypto, which, you know, people, it's called cryptocurrency, but people definitely view it as an asset because of its range, wide volatility of the asset. You know, like I said, my near and dear to my heart, my collectibles. So as I've talked about on Mile High Fi, yeah, Magic the Gathering was a game that I used to play, and the inherent value that came along with some pieces of cardboard over a different span of time. So yeah, lots of different assets out there. Did I miss anything that
I was gonna
in that
ask,
category?
I was gonna ask you about cash because in your definition you mentioned that it's your definition of an asset. It's a form of an investment that you're trying to make with the, I guess, expectation that it's going to gain value. But you did mention that it could lose value as well. But whenever I think of cash, that's hard for me to put it in the like a category of an asset, simply because it's going to be eaten up by inflation over a period of time. So how and I mean, but that is clearly a category of an asset. But I'm
Right.
curious why if you kind of feel the same. I'm betting that you do because
Yeah,
I know you don't really hold any cash.
right. So yeah, I mean, obviously having cash is an asset, like in your like in accounting terms, cash is still an asset. But as you've so aptly put, you know, if you just let it sit on the sidelines, non-deployed into a investment, then you are losing money to inflation. So it's a depreciating asset.
Ah,
Just the same way that it would be, I mean, other assets would be like vehicles and houses and whatever else that we won't go into all of those different types of things, but traditionally when we're talking about net worth or things of that nature, some people put those um, into consideration, or if you have a pension or other things like that. Yeah, obviously, like those are other assets that you have.
yeah, that's a really good point. It's a depreciating asset, similar to a car. It's an asset you quote unquote made an investment into this thing and you're holding it, but like you said, over a period of time, it's going to continue to depreciate, and you have to be aware of that. Just kind of going in eyes wide open. That, like in my case, we hold probably more cash than some people would feel comfortable, but it is nice to have on the sidelines, and we know that it's losing money, but it is our emergency fund, our just in case stuff, and it's used from time to time for some of the big purchases that come our way that we didn't necessarily plan for, like going to see
Yeah.
Harry Styles in New York.
That's right. You're welcome, Lexi. Yes. I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the biggest part is just to understand the decisions that you make for those particular assets and how they're deployed across your portfolio. So then, I mean, I think most of the time when we talk about asset allocation more than anything else, people really are talking about a portfolio primarily comprised of stocks, bonds, cash, and then you may just say alternatives. I think is how most people would state that. Anything that I've missed in kind of those buckets so far?
Not so far is the next step that we're going to talk about how we would hold them, or like how, is there any kind of guidance? And I guess it's just personal preference more than anything, but around like what the percentage balance of each of those things would be. I know I'm teeing you up it depends answer here.
That's right. As a former, yeah, consultant, it depends. No, yeah, I mean, and first of all, of course, this for entertainment purposes only. We are not advisors, yada yada yada. But yeah, what I would say is it completely is dependent upon your individual situation, right? Like somebody like we were talking about Caleb not that long ago in our last episode. You know, a 25-year-old's time horizon is going to look very different than your own or my own. Is three different people. We're going to have three different strategies, I would imagine. And I think some of that we can probably talk to here in this episode. But, you know, by and large, I think conventional wisdom would say as you're younger, you can take on more risk and be in a position to have more volatility with the expectation that that is going to give you a larger driver for growth in the future. So, what that materially means is generally you have a higher allocation of stocks versus bonds or cash because traditionally that is your highest growth engine out of kind of those three assets.
Yep, got it.
But obviously, as you get closer to retirement age, I believe the terminology is you're de-risking your portfolio. And so theoretically, I think a lot of people would say if you've already won the game, why are you still playing? You know, take some chips off the table, so to speak. And so that's why essentially what you're seeking to do with your portfolio allocation is de-risk. And so what that looks like in practice is generally moving more out of equities or stocks and increasing in a more stable asset like bonds or real estate or cash, depending once again on your risk appetite.
So do you want to move into asset location, or do you want to kind of talk through what your current allocation is and why it is set up that way?
Sure. So I don't mind talking about my asset allocation. Given the fact that I'm still actively working, Dawn is actively still working, we have a pretty, I won't even say pretty, we have an aggressive portfolio. So we are currently sitting at over 97% stocks, and the balance is in cash, things like 529 accounts and whatever else, but we're near 100% in stocks. I will say that we keep enough cash on hand to basically pay our bills, a little bit more than that. We also have a home equity line of credit or a HELOC account This really is a strategy that I employed after reading a Mr. Money Mustache article long ago. Was he was in favor of leveraging a HELOC account as an emergency fund or in lieu of an emergency fund, is as opposed to having a large amount of cash, like I just said, as a depreciating asset, that he said, hey, go deploy that money into something that's returning a better return than cash. And if you really have that true emergency, you can go to your HELOC and tap it.
Yep. And on my side, I haven't done all of the math yet, but I am in the majority of our retirement and brokerage accounts. For the most part, it is 100% stocks. There are some areas within that I know have a blend. So, like Lori's 401k, for example, had very few options available to it. And what we chose to do was put her in I think it was like a 2040 or 2045 retirement account. So if you actually looked at it, it would have a sprinkling of some kind of bonds associated with that. So I know that there are some, and we'll see that too. If the market has any kind of shifting that is aggressive, that won't follow exactly the same path as the S&P, I guess. And then in addition to that, we have real estate. So we have approximately, I'd have to do the math on this, but I think it's approximately 30% of the equity for our real estate is what makes up our net worth.
That's fair. Yeah.
And then about 1 or so% in cash, 1 or 2% in cash, even though it's a fairly high number, maybe higher than that. I need to check my math. I have a homework assignment.
That's right. I'll hold you to it to do your homework. But yeah, and obviously Lori's still working. You have cash flow from your rentals that's still coming in. So that mimics in some ways the same way that you would be getting interest payments back from, let's say, a bond. So yeah, I mean you've got a number of different factors there as well that make yours more nuanced.
And I kind of wonder, this might be a question that I would save to ask one of those fee-only advisors is, given my circumstances, like you said, I have the real estate that acts kind of like a bond, and I have Lori's pension, which would start in when she turns 60, that is guaranteed income, quote unquote guaranteed income. That also acts as a bond in a way, right? And then 7-ish years after that, we'll have Social Security. So in my case, I often wonder if there would be any advantage to me adjusting my overall strategy to be more conservative, or if those things are providing enough conservatism for my overall portfolio.
Right. Yeah. And so that's what, I mean, of course, it's a question to purely be answered by you more than anything else. But like what you're saying is, yeah, I mean, the term that like bonds or Social Security or anything else, pensions all fall under is fixed income. So those are fixed income instruments. So traditionally more conservative because by and large, it's, in some ways, more guaranteed, it's less volatile. And so, yeah, if you were then going to turn around and make yours more heavy on, more conservative, I mean, depending on what you're looking to try and do, is if it's wealth preservation or wealth growth, that's kind of the determination, I think, for a lot of those decisions.
I learned something new, Elliot. Fixed income. I've heard that term a million times and did not know that it referred to bond. Well, I don't know if you said bonds, but to Social
Yep.
Security and
Yep.
to
Bonds.
pensions. So that's
Yep.
good.
Yep. That's what happens when you work at a primarily a fixed income shop for 10 years of your career. So I do know some of these things. But yes, I mean, and so, fixed income being in a lot of ways was like things like pensions, and then when you moved into 401ks kind of being the primarily the way of saving for retirement and things of that nature. That's defined contribution is kind of the yin to the yang of fixed income. So that you have a defined contribution into the account, and then it's, obviously variable on the back end, whereas a fixed income, it obviously fixed, knowing how much you're going to receive on a certain cadence.
Yeah,
So,
interesting. I'm learning some
yes,
new things here, Elliot. This is
that's
good.
right. That's right. All right. Anything else on asset allocation before we move into asset location?
Nope, I don't think so.
So, asset location, I won't get too much into the weeds, but just by and large, really you have well, really kind of four different types of accounts. And I'll say that why I say four. Typically, you would say three. You have taxable accounts, so things like your checking account, your savings account, treasury, money market, high yield savings, or a brokerage. You have a tax deferred account, so things like a 401k and an IRA, a traditional IRA, 403bs, so on and so forth. And then you have, I didn't, I realized these are actually called tax free. That seems like a bad moniker to me, but they are tax free accounts. So think of them as your Roth accounts. So accounts that you've already funded with post tax dollars. So whether that's a Roth 401k, that's a Roth IRA, etc. And then the fourth account really is the HSA. I singled that one out because it has kind of the perks of both the tax deferred and the tax free account is. And I actually learned in the 201 class that if it is from a employer, directly from your employer, that you actually save on FICA taxes as well. So a lot of times it's referred to as the triple tax advantage account. It's actually the quadruple tax advantage account if you do it from an employer. So it's tax deferred on its way in, growth is tax free, and it's tax free withdrawal if it's withdrawn for a medical expense on the way out. And if you don't exhaust it by the time you turn 65, then it can turn into a traditional IRA at worst. So then it's back to tax deferred.
When you say that if it's from an employer, are you referring to the money that they contribute into the account, or are you saying that they are like the custodian of the account?
So that's a good question, and I should probably cut this because I don't know all the nuance of this.
Okay.
Um, I'm gonna look it up.
Because I didn't think of the question until just now, but I remember you guys talking about it in the 201, and it didn't really, I couldn't really wrap my head around it because I know my HSA is through Fidelity, but my employer always contributed a portion to it each year.
Here we go. HSA contributions made through employer payroll deductions, which is Section 125 cafeteria plan, are exempt from the 7.65% FICA taxes, Social Security and Medicare, for both employees and employers. So these pre-tax contributions avoid federal, state, and unemployment taxes, offering a better tax advantage than direct after-tax contributions.
So, in other words, I would understand that to mean that if you were on the ACA, as an example, and you were on the one of the plans that offered an HSA, you can contribute money, your own money, into an HSA. That money is going to grow tax free, but it wasn't necessarily you had that money somehow, some way, so you've already paid taxes on it. It'd be a different mechanism than going through your employer plan.
Correct. So you could, and we're probably out of our depth
Yeah.
here. I certainly am out of my depth here, but yes, I mean, I think by and large, if you're getting a payroll deduction and it's going straight into your HSA, that is where you would be saving that 7.65% in FICA taxes.
Hmm. Okay. Got it.
So nice and muddy at this point.
Yeah.
But asset location. So I mean, I think by and large, right, is we're talking about three or four different accounts, or you can have multiple accounts in each one of those buckets. That it's important that you spread your assets, your portfolio across those different accounts. And there's reasons on why you would do that. So part of that we talked about in our FI 201 session was we talked about the ACA and the cliff that's associated with the ACA. And so that has to do with the amount of income that you pull in a given year. So, what I think it's 400% times the federal poverty level. So, if you eclipse that, then you lose your subsidies, right? And that is a very large implication for doing so, financial implication for doing so. Additionally, a big piece of asset location is understanding how your asset allocation is located in those different types of accounts. So, one of the reasons that I'll say this is things like bonds, for an example, should be kept in tax deferred buckets generally, or in, I would say, tax advantaged buckets, because every time you get an interest payment, that is a taxable event. And so you want to reduce the amount of drag on your portfolio in those number of taxable events that you're continually having. And so the fact that you could have that in different accounts that are shielded from that taxable event, being things like either a Roth account, let's just use IRAs for simplistic nature. So whether that's a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA, those are still advantaged in those times that you can change. Like, you can go in and sell an asset and not have that be a taxable event in those accounts.
So
Still with me so far?
I think so. So you wouldn't want to hold bonds, or it's less optimal to hold bonds in a brokerage account.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. By and large, the whole reason that we bring up this topic, right, is asset allocations important, asset locations important, but it's the overall portfolio strategy that you're trying to really get correct. Is you want to have, I think the analogy that our buddy Alan used is you want to have the right pizza presented to yourself so that you can pull from any slice that you want. You want that cash slice, you want that, bonds piece, do you want that equities piece? And so being able to pull from them, because certain ones are going to generate ordinary income, some are not. And so that's the levers that you want to be able to pull to make things the most efficient for things like subsidies, or let's say, hey, you want to be able to do a bunch of Roth conversions. Well, then you want more room to essentially let's say, generate more income because you need to have that space. So yeah, there's just lots of different considerations to be made.
And this is an area that I will say that I definitely didn't fully understand for a very long time and didn't appreciate because like I've mentioned in previous conversations such as the one of our more recent ones where I'm like, where should I pull a big chunk of money from at this stage in my life, having not wanting to completely or even significantly reduce my cash position. I wish that I had a little bit more flexibility if I had done things slightly differently. I mean, ultimately, it's all going to be fine, but it's just getting my mind wrapped around. I have to maybe do a hybrid approach to taking a little bit from here, a little bit from here, and a little bit from here to make up that some amount instead of just having it readily available and being completely confident with taking it out of one location. And if I had done things a little bit differently, I think I would have set it up where I was funding a Roth account, which I didn't do hardly at all ever. And I would have funded more of a brokerage account so that I had that growing along as well. In my case, the vast majority of my assets are located in my tax deferred accounts. And then there's also a portion that's in our real estate.
Yeah. And I would say, like, once again, there's a number of different strategies that you can still employ, right? It's not to say, oh no, like I've made some crucial mistake in that my money isn't exactly where I want it to be. I think there are, advanced strategies that you can employ to basically get the money out in a tax efficient way, in whatever way makes the most sense to you. So whether that is Roth conversions, whether that's 72T, there are a number of different factors I think to consider, but I also think there's a number of other factors that you have in your own particular example that make it harder to also manage that. Lori, no, no. I mean, other opportunities that obviously you don't have to pull the same sum. Like if you were going to do Roth conversions, you don't have to pull the same sum that you were originally planning to. So now, okay, are you more worried about things like IRMA or required minimum distributions or things of that nature? Because you're like, oh my gosh, I have this quote unquote tax bomb over here because I have so much money that essentially I have to pay tax on it at some point in my life.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and as you're talking through that, I still have a lot to really learn in some of those categories, wrap my head around fully so that I know I have a strategy for the best path forward because I like to keep things as simple as possible. And when we start talking about all the different options and perhaps even using a mix of options, it's like, oh man, some of this stuff gets pretty complex and you have to be really on top of it so that you don't make mistakes. And that's maybe, again, in hindsight, I don't know that if I had the choice, I would have rather been in a situation where it was a little bit more laid out at this point as opposed to, oh, I got to I see the puzzle. I kind of see the border, but I'm trying to put all the pieces on the inside and it's getting it's still a little fuzzy.
yeah, and that's a good analogy. I mean, I think like part of this conversation is like you feel like it's fuzzy. I still, I mean, I'm years away, or at least some months away before I think I would step away. And who knows? It could be longer. Who knows? It could be shorter. I don't know.
It's months,
But
days.
yeah, years, months, days, hours, minutes. I don't know anymore. But I say all of that to say it also isn't just perfectly clear to me either. And yeah, I have an idea of a plan, but at the same point, I don't know exactly which plan we're going to enact and what's the most optimal way to do it. I spend way too much time in projection lab right now, and I'm still very much a novice at it. So yeah, I think it's okay to give yourself kind of the grace and understanding that we're all learning this. And I think this is the topic of decumulation that I think is the most complex, least talked about topic in the space just in general. Is everybody thinks that, and I don't even say that everybody thinks that accumulation is the hard part. I think it's pretty debunked at this point to anybody in the space that, hey, just saving money is the easy part. It is then how do you get in the mindset of being okay with spending down the money that you have spent a lifetime accumulating, and then the actual mechanics of, okay, where is that money coming from in addition to the complexity of dealing with emotions.
I heard Joe Saul-Sehy a while back on Paula Pant's podcast talk about how when you're accumulating, it's relatively easy and you learn a significant amount kind of upfront and then maybe some along the way. I'm kind of paraphrasing here what he's based on my memory, what he said, but I remember him saying that once you reach that point of retirement, it's like a whole new set of skills, a whole new set of tools that you have to learn. And you may have picked up some along the way, but you really have to shift your mindset towards learning and educating yourself on all this stuff as you're entering that second half. The game is different than it was during the first half.
Yeah. No, I think that's pretty insightful and is really true. And I mean, I think we each kind of talked about, even on the last episode that we were talking about with Caleb, is that we're both optimists. I think we're both hopeful people. Is realize that if you got to the finish line of FI, like, you're a very intelligent person, you're a very driven person, like, you figured out that problem. But accumulation's just a new exciting problem that you get to solve. And turns out you have all the time in the world to go figure it out too. So yeah, and not to mention that this is not just a problem for the FI community, right? This is just a retiree problem. And I know that that R word can scare you, even as you talked about your quitiversary and everything else. You're very apt to not use the R word, but I will say, like, there are many, many more retirees and people trying to speak to living on a quote unquote fixed income than just people in the FI community.
Yeah, that's true. And I even think about like my parents and grandparents, and they've all gone through it at one point or another. It looked completely different for them than it has for me. But you're right. I mean, they had to figure out whether it was some form of like a three-legged stool of investments and Social Security and pension, or maybe it was just two legs to that stool, or maybe in worst case it was only one. So I know that there's a lot to figure out, a lot that they had to figure out along the way as well. And it is, like you said, it's a good problem to have, and it's a good problem to work towards solving as well.
Right. Exactly. Well, is there anything else that we want to talk about on this topic?
No, I don't think so. It was good. I think it was good to learn a couple of terms there that I had heard and hadn't been as familiar with. So appreciate you walking through them.
Well, hopefully I've educated at least one.
That's
So
right.
or I haven't screwed anything up too bad is really my best hope. So
Yep. I'll put it all through AI and see if there's any mistakes that were made.
yeah, that's right. Everything that he said was utter and complete garbage. So disregard everything that has been said, because you are now officially dumber for having heard it. Right?
That's right.
I'm very poorly paraphrasing Billy Madison,
Yep.
but you get my point.
I do.
So, all right. Well, it was fun. And until next time, Josh,
Yep. Thanks, Elliot. Talk to you later.
see ya.